I can go ahead and start with the intro. We don't need the presentation for that. So my name is Veronica. I'm with Labor Compliance Enterprise. We are a small business, family-owned and operated compliance. We specialize in labor compliance for contractors. So we're all in the right room together. We have been in business. We've got over 20 years of labor compliance experience helping contractors, both on enforcement and the contractor side, but mostly on the contractor side. That's our specialty. So we incorporated in 2009 is when I went out on my own after some labor law changes because of the recession. So that 2008 recession got us where we are today. And I'm really glad you guys are here because it's a completely different scenario. It's like night and day. And so there's a lot of information that I'll give you. I want to leave you with as much information and tools, resources that you can go back to and look at afterwards as much as possible. So it's going to be a lot of information crammed in, but I'm glad you're here because it's really important. This is a very important component to public works. I'm sure as contractors, you guys see, just the overall, all of the changes and how stringent the state has become with public works contracting. I only see one portion of it. I see the labor compliance side, but that is enough. Just that alone is enough to, to get us here and to get you guys in training. And so definitely here with the perspective of helping you through this so you can keep your profits in your pocket, because these days labor compliance is directly tied into payment releases. So I'm going to say 9 out of 10 agencies or prime contractors now are aware and savvy enough to know that they need to hold payment and get all of the compliance information before making those progress and especially the final payment. So it's really important that you guys stay ahead of the compliance, that you know it enough to survive, and it's always going to be a learning because it's evolving. So again, like what it looked like when I started or when we came into business is always changing. So the definition of public works, may have been like one sentence to start with. Now, as they keep adding, it's like 4 sentences, so they just keep adding what's covered, like what was prevailing wage once upon a time has grown today. It's almost like, you're breathing on site and it's prevailing wage, but we'll go over all of that, all of the coverage. So what we're going to talk about today is what is public works. We're going to talk about the authority of compliance, so the hierarchy, just understanding how from the federal level to the state level to the contracts, what's on top, what supersedes another. We're going to go over the PWC 100, basically helping you get all of your information about the compliance up front at the beginning of the project. So if we think of labor compliance, since it's construction, it's projects, and we think of it from a project management perspective where we've got the preparing for it, and then the start, and then during we have the progress while we're in construction. It's just kind of the ongoing routine paperwork, and then we've got the closeout. So we're going to think of it as the life cycle of a project. And we're going to look at wage determination, so how to find the prevailing wage rate, which is project specific. It's always going to be tied in to a specific project. So a lot of times,
what's the name of your company again?
Labor Compliance Enterprise.
Labor.
Yes. It's always going to be tied into a project. So there's times where I'll give a contractor prevailing wage rate that's required for their project, and then they take that rate and they start using it on other projects, and that's the last thing you want to do. One thing that we got to remember in labor compliance is that there's some components that are constant. So they're going to be on every project, but then, that I would say is like the skeleton, but then everything else that fills it is varied. So we never want to apply, we never want to assume that from project to project, the information is going to be the same, the requirements are going to be the same. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about prevailing wage rates, the way that we achieve paying the correct rate, because there's different pay structures, and those tie into fringe benefits. So we're going to talk about fringe benefits, and then just give some tips on how to avoid some of the pitfalls that are out there. So that'll be day one. So day one, we'll talk about it. We'll look at the certified payroll reports. We'll talk about how to get the correct prevailing wage rate. And then for tomorrow, day two, what I call a hot topic is apprenticeship. So in California, apprenticeship, yes.
Will you explain the difference between prevailing wage and union scale?
Yes. I'm going to write that down. And when we get to that, when we get to the wages, I'm going to put that note down. So because it is very important. A lot of people think that, I just want to make sure that we'll hit that for.
And prevailing wage.
Okay. Great question. Oh, okay. Oh, you're welcome. Okay. That's it. Yeah, that is a great question. And then back to apprenticeship. Apprenticeship, I call it a hot topic. It's really hot in California, especially. And so it's a way, right now I would say it's kind of like the gateway to audits. So we definitely don't want to be audited. Audits are, even if we're compliant, we could be 100% compliant, but who has time for an audit? It's costly, it's stressful, it puts management on meetings that, they don't really need to be on. They need to be out building and getting the project, the structures done. So we want to try to avoid audits. Apprenticeship is one area where audits get triggered. And then also there's a lot of very rapid changes in the prevailing wage environment. And so I want to make you guys aware of that because it's important. Usually what happens is when the labor laws change, when there's a labor law added, it's not only labor law, it could be contract law. When a law that affects us here, contractors, prevailing wage gets added, it takes a few years to see it on the contracts. So pre-COVID shutdown, there was some additions to the labor law, to the contract law that gets included in public works. And it's a major issue right now. It's called skilled and trained workforce. So we'll save that. It's on tomorrow's slide. But again, I'm going to make sure I leave you guys with good information. I don't want to, it's kind of like, don't shoot the messenger. I don't like being the bearer of bad news. There's a lot of work, a lot of money to be made in public works, but you have to be informed. It is vital. I mean, right now, it's just kind of a sink or swim scenario where if you're not at least working towards getting properly structured for government contract, then you're really taking a risk because the penalties, everything involved in the cost of an audit can take especially for if it's a small business, can wipe us out. So I'm not saying don't do it, but I am saying do your homework and be informed.
So Veronica, are there companies that can work with our accountant to actually work, cross, I guess, integrate
Well, I'm one company.
that no compliance?
Yes.
Main disease that can work with our accountant to help work us through this, rather than
Yeah, so we do that. We do, A to Z compliance for contractors. To my understanding, you can Google, and companies will come up in the search. The hard part is and here's why I stay on the contractor side. The hard part is the difference between labor compliance from the contractor side versus the enforcement side. So a lot of labor compliance is working for the government or the government agencies. And that's fine. They're there to do their job to enforce. So some of them I think might help contractors, but not a lot of them. They're so busy on the government side. They're so busy. And I used to complain a lot about the government auditors. And let me tell you, when I started really getting bombarded with audits, I have much respect for them, because it is a lot of work to do the audits, apply the labor law, work under deadlines, and get all twisted in your head with numbers. So I have completely backed off my little judgmental attitude. And as we try to almost work as a team. We just want to be, compliant and somewhat transparent. And but going back to your question, I think if you Google, you might be able to find somebody, but most of them will be on enforcement.
I didn't hear that your company does that.
It does, yes. And I didn't bring my cards
your
today.
information at the
I will. Yeah, I'm going to leave you with a lot of information today. Yes.
Great. Thank
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so.
We don't sign in on our guest list.
No, you don't have to sign in. Okay, so here we went over what we're going to talk about today. And then now, so what is Public Works? There's $1,000 threshold for California Public Works. It's the construction, alteration, demolition, installation, maintenance, or repair. That's the part that I'm taking. So, we can, kind of traditionally, and even just in the sense of thinking about construction, we think that when the construction starts, I call it like boots on ground, that's when the prevailing wage kicks in, but that's not always the case. Sometimes prevailing wage tasks fall into the project prior to being on site. So that would be maybe going to the site and surveying. You have to be careful. And then definitely after. So sometimes when the job is done, the owner buys it off. There can be tasks like maintenance that are prevailing wage covered. So the good thing to do is to always ask questions to whoever your contact is at the agency, or if you're contracted with the prime contractor, you want to ask the prime a lot of questions. So there's 3 basic components to prevailing wage compliance. Number 1 is pay the prevailing wage rate. So for sure we want to do that. Also, we want to keep and submit certified payroll records. So that's one of the constants. That's going to be on every project. And we want to comply with apprenticeship standards. So tomorrow I'll go more in depth as far as the difference from federal to state and mixed funding. But we're going to see that a lot of what drives the requirements on a project depends on the funding. So if it's a purely federal, it's going to have slightly different requirements than if it's state or if it's mixed funds. So in California, apprenticeship is important. And the reason why is because the parents, had a big lashback against the state when the state removed the shop classes from the schools. So, you know, back in the day, metal was my favorite shop class. We had wood, plastics, all that good stuff. They don't have that anymore. So the parents questioned the state and they said, hey, what about if my kid is not college bound? What are you offering? Not only that, but the baby boomers are retiring. So the state wants to make sure that we have workers, we have construction workers behind those people who are retiring to keep those buildings going. So the state is just very serious about labor compliance. Those are the three that are going to be constant. If your project is not subject to apprenticeship, at least we'll find out if it is or not, and I'll show you that in tomorrow when we get deeper into apprenticeship. So we want to register with the DIR. The Department of Industrial Relations is the government entity that oversees prevailing wage. They oversee workers' comp, OSHA, prevailing wage, like labor law. So they are the overseers. Once upon a time, this didn't exist. The first time that they talked about it in a state seminar, we almost threw tomatoes at them if we would have had them, because it was new. Nobody knew how it was going to work. But again, the way that things always evolve in compliance is we're there now, and they have a good system for it. Registering with the DIR gives your company, gives a contractor, or even if it's a company that doesn't have a contractor's license because their services are not required, it gives them a registration number. That's your ticket to the game. That's your ticket to being able to bid and being able to work on public works projects. There are exemptions where if all of your work is under $25,000, there's a certain threshold. That'll be in some of the literature. And that's the only time that you would be exempt, but we don't like to play with this stuff. I say, register, because it's just, there's huge penalties. It's what everybody's looking for. From a compliance side, labor compliance, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look up your CSLB license, if that's applicable to what you do, and your DIR registration. You're not allowed on the job without those.
Can I say something now?
Sure.
Well, even if you're gonna even try bidding on public works jobs and you're not registered, the DRI will fine you, right?
Yes, don't even bid without it. I'll give you the link to it, and we'll see where it is. It's on the main DIR page. So registration, that's why it's in here, because you have to have it. Again, it's your ticket to the game. Another thing is to always read your contract, always. Even if you've been with an agency for 15 years and your scope is the same and the contract always looks the same and you get to this comfort level where you just want to just get it and sign it. Don't do that, because there's a lot of changes, especially now. Again, what prompted me to go out on my own was the changes. There's always changes, and those changes, I've seen it happen where in Orange County, they didn't have a PLA, a project labor agreement. We'll talk about those, with one of my clients who had been doing work with them for years consistently. I told them about PLAs. I told them what you need to be aware of before you take one on. Well, they signed a contract without knowing. Next thing you know, they're fighting with 5 unions. Their job is upside down. And it was clearly in the contract, but I get it. We're busy. We're busy, and it looked like business as usual, so they just signed the contract. Once they signed it, they didn't realize that they were bound to a whole nother set of almost a whole different type of compliance that ties into wage law. But, so that's the thing, is these contracts, a lot of times there's more than prevailing wage written into the prevailing wage related verbiage in a contract. So that's things like local hire. You know, if we're working for some of these big agencies or cities, they want the jobs to stay locally. And I'm not mad at them for that. I agree with that, because prior to local hire enforcement, we would see contractors coming from all over the place, out of state, up north, what have you. And so, you know, it just seems more fair to at least give the local residents job opportunities. They're paying the taxes on these. A lot of times these projects are funded through bonds and different initiatives that the locals are paying for. So we're seeing things like that. We're seeing things like local hire. We're seeing things, especially right now with the homelessness crisis, that's triggered a lot of building. And if we're going to get involved in projects having to do with building structures for the homeless, there's a lot of different funding that happens there. So they're going to have their own requirements, like maybe HUD, or, you know, so it's just very funding and agency specific. But to be on the safe side, read through it. You know, if you're kind of computer savvy and it's in a PDF, you know, type in some keywords, prevailing wage, you know, and see what comes up. But definitely read your contract and proactively comply. Yes.
Veronica, I need some clarity on that.
Okay.
Okay, I'm signatory with the labor ceiling. How does that affect me with the PLA agreement?
With the PLA, if you're union, you're in pretty good position.
So it won't have any negative effect on me, right? As far as the local hire.
It still can. It still can. So union contractors are going to have to comply with everything the same. We had a question already about union versus prevailing wage. So that will go over, and you'll need to definitely pay close attention to that, because prevailing wage can be different than union wage. And some of those worker requirements, even if you're signatory, you got to make sure that you're in compliant with some of those requirements. So a lot of times on PLAs with a union contractor, it's the union is helping the contractor, whether they're union or not. On PLAs, they have to help be compliant with whatever that agency is asking for. But we'll go over that, because tomorrow's slide has PLAs in it. And we'll go over the difference from non-union to union. So, but great question. So we want to proactively comply. Why? Because it's attached to our money. I mean, we're not going to get paid a lot of times. And even if somebody's not monitoring enough, they can get to any point in the project and demand all the records. So let's say you're on a 6-month project, and we've been busy and we keep putting the labor compliance on the back burner. Now all of a sudden we're in month 5 and they want all the records. The last thing people in your office or you want to be doing is creating records, certified payroll reports for 5 months in the past, because it is time consuming. The reporting is very tedious. You know, it's hard to go back and figure out. Your overall setup for how you manage your construction projects from a paperwork process, daily reports, sign-in sheets, all of that comes into play. So we want to be proactive, because we don't want to end up having to work all weekend to get reports in, because we're holding up payments. We get, I call them love letters, from primes that are like, you're holding up everybody's payment. Get your records in. We're like, okay, get them in.
Can you just explain proactive? That means you should submit stuff before it's due?
Yes, not before it's due. Don't let it get past due. So you want to set up your systems where, like every week on a certain day it gets done. Set a habit of addressing it, because when I first started in this, people weren't proactive. At that time, you could let it sit. At that time, penalties were $50 a day per worker. Now they're $200 per day. Enforcement is increased. Everything has gotten tighter. So we don't want to delay payment, and we don't want to give ourselves extras. So I just mean really to stay on top of it. Don't let it back up. So the hierarchy on public works projects, we have state and federal law. They're the masters. So they're up here. They have the most authority. We have to comply with anything state and federal. If it's both state and federal project, you comply with whatever's stricter. And we'll go over that down the line. Next is labor compliance programs. So big agencies will have their own program that has more than what the law says. And this is because of their responsibility to administer compliance. So they read the programs. Like, for example, I know already that the city of LA does not allow biweekly payments. The state allows biweekly payroll. The feds require weekly payroll. The city of LA says, no, we want the workers paid weekly. So there's little things like that that may be part of the agency's program that is beyond the state. Then we have the PLAs, project labor agreements. We'll talk about those tomorrow. That's where your the union, it's the public works project is unionized. You're like kind of a union contractor only for that project. So it doesn't make, if you're non-union, it doesn't make your whole shop union, but it makes the collective bargaining agreements applicable on that project. So you have to be very careful.
You gotta hire union and non-union employees.
You have to, yes. If you're a non-union, you use your workers and you get union workers dispatched in ratios. So we're going to cover PLAs tomorrow. Here's one thing you can never do. We can't write labor code or any law out of contract. So if we go into contract with the biggest agency out there and they make a mistake on their contract, they didn't put that it's prevailing wage, that is of no relevance to a state auditor. In that case, if that was the case, we could all make mistakes and not have it in the contract and then have it not apply. So what would happen in that scenario is the state would do its due diligence, they would do their audit, and we would have to handle that off to the side with the agency or with the prime, whoever failed to tell us that the project was prevailing wage. So that's the one thing that we cannot do, is that even if it wasn't told to us, if it's prevailing wage covered, then it's auditable. It's something that could be audited. And let's go to the next slide. Okay, so at the beginning of the project, let's think about again the project from a labor compliance from a project management life cycle perspective. We want to start ahead of time. We should have looked at prevailing wage ahead of time anyway in order to do the bid. So how are you going to bid properly if you don't know the correct wage? One of the biggest violations in prevailing wage is, we'll go over it, but it's that some of the rates have increases. They have predetermined increases in the wage schedule. So if you're crunching numbers doing a bid, and especially if it's a long project, some of those increases can be $2 an hour every 6 months. So what if you're on a long project and you didn't know that by the time you get to a certain point, maybe even by the time you just get on the project, because your scope of work is one of the last trades out there, you're $6 an hour under. So really, you need to know the prevailing wage rate while you're bidding. So that's one good example of how it starts prior to the contract. So the PWC 100 is actually, it's a form that is required to be submitted by the agency, so by the owner. So when I say agency, owner, the government, I mean whoever's bidding it out. So whether it's LAUSD or the city of La Puente, whoever the owner is, they are required to submit the PWC 100, but the reason why I put it in here and I like it is because we have access to it through the DIR's website, and it has great information for us that we use for the project. So let me go to, actually I'm just going to stay on here. So what it has is, it has, I know it's hard to see, it has what's called the DIR project number. That's how you go online and you find the PWC 100. So one of the first things that you're going to do when you are awarded a public works, a prevailing wage project, is you're going to ask, what is the DIR project number? Because if the agency has done their part, then we should be able to pull up that project information online. Some agencies, there's only 4 left in the state of California: LAUSD, the City of LA, City of Sacramento, and it might be Caltrans, I can't remember the last one. They are the only ones after those big changes because of the recession. They're the only ones with big programs left in place where things might work a little bit differently. We deal with them directly and not so much the state. But pretty much just make it a rule, is there a DIR project number? Because that DIR project number is going to give you access to the PWC 100. It's going to give you the official name of the project. It's going to give you the physical address of the project. It's going to give you the bid advertisement date, which is what we need to get that prevailing wage rate. So I like it because it's something in writing. Now remember, there's always the there's always the tiny, what if. I have seen, and it's very rare that it happens, but I have seen mistakes on the PWC 100. People who are filling these out from the agency, they're human, just like us. So they could, put a mistake. So this is why I say keep a copy. Keep a copy of everything, because there have been changes on the website that auditors 5 years later look at those same website pages that change, try to ding us for violations, but because we have proof of what was existing at that time, we've been able to get penalties waived in those circumstances. So, if you get your PWC 100, I'm going to say with confidence, use the information. If you notice anything off, feel free to question it, because again, they're human on the other end, and at the very least, save it, because we want to show what was on the state website at the time that we started the labor compliance. Any questions?
Is it easier for you to deal with union contractors than non-union contractors?
I'm not biased, so for me it doesn't matter.
No?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't
We
matter.
get a copy of these slides.
If Meriwether Williams is okay with it, I am.
Oh, okay.
They're recording it.
Yeah.
Oh, great, great, thank you.
Sure. So let's go back for a second to getting the information. The PWC 100, so the DIR project ID is good. Also, and remember, you got to ask these questions. Oh, and if you're bidding, if you're in the bid process, use that Q&A to ask questions. If you're not sure, put your questions in the Q&A and let the agency help you hone in on if it's prevailing wage, is there a PLA? I always ask if there's a PLA. If I'm involved in any, which normally I'm just, hitting the paperwork once it starts, the prevailing wage part. But my recommendation, when I have been part of big project teams and I know they're bidding, I'm like, let me in on that Q&A, and I want to know if there's a PLA. I want to know what is in that RFP or that RFQ. But another thing to ask for, remember, the questioning, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, and you really need it on these things. So you want to ask who the compliance person is. So who's my contact for labor compliance? If they're organized, which is better for us, it really helps keep us on our toes. When there's a lot of compliance on a project, I actually appreciate it because I would rather have all those checks and balances in place. Again, it's kind of like a team effort, and just be safe and know if anything's wrong up front as opposed to what by the time we end the project or even 2 years later. Ask who is the labor compliance? What is happening with the labor compliance on the project? If it's a big agency, they probably have a whole department with the whole program. You also want to ask, if you're a subcontractor, you want to ask the prime if they're a compliance packet. So that's one thing that we put together for the generals who we monitor on behalf of. I monitor prevailing wage projects on behalf of prime contractors. And so what I do is I put a compliance packet together. And this way they can give it to their subs, and their subs will know what the requirements are. So, and compliance packets, they can vary from 15 pages to 300 pages. So this is what I mean about knowing you're very project specific, what are the requirements, because the differences can be that big. So for the prevailing wage rates, there are 2 times a year that a determination will come out. We're going to hit the internet in a minute. During this slide, we're going to go to the, I'm going to pull it up here on the presentation, and you're more than welcome to follow along if you want, if you have laptops, but it's not required, but if you have them, that's great. So prevailing wage rates are issued on February 22nd and August 22nd. Every year, 2 determinations come out. So it's not our regular calendar year. We're not looking at January 1st and like June 1st. There's this odd, February 22nd date. It's effective 10 days after the issue date. So if you're bidding on February 24th, you're going to stay with this February 22nd determination because it's not effective until 10 days after. That's because back in the day, it took 10 days for them to mail us the rates. So a lot of these weird little quirky rules are just a buildup, of what's been happening over time with prevailing wage rate. So that's important to know which determination applies to your project. On a rare occasion, rates do go backwards. So I did see a rate in San Diego that was $3.80 less on one of the fringe benefit components. So we don't want to just automatically assume that we can always pull up what's current on the website. I would use that as a last resort and maybe check the determination before it if we're not given the information, because here's the thing. We can go in asking all these questions. We can have all our ducks in a row. We're registered. We have a CSLB number that's active. We know all this stuff, and we're asking questions, but maybe nobody's answering. So it doesn't mean that we're going to get the answers. Most of the time we are. But if we're not, we're going to have to wing it, and we're going to have to go with the best information we have available. And so if nobody is around to tell us what the bid advertisement date is, go with the contract date. The PwC 100 will tell us the bid advertisement date. It's the first one. It's advertised twice. So again, going back to the old school days, if anybody remembers, what you had to do if you created a DBA, you had to run it in the newspaper, right, for 2 weeks. Well, they need to run the prevailing wage jobs for 2 weeks. So that's why there's 2 bid advertisement dates, because back in the day, the way that you found your prevailing wage work was advertised in the newspaper, and they had to run it for 2 weeks. So we always want to use the first bid advertisement date as our base, our trigger for what our prevailing wage rate requirements are. So that's what we want to do. We want to use the contract date. We want to not just automatically think that, oh, let me just go see what's current on the website and I'm good there. No, don't do that. I hear compliance seminars advising people to do that, and I'm like, no, like last resort, you want to do that. So it's effective 10 days after issue. That's important for your bidding. Bid advertisement date or other date is on the PWC 100. Now they have a Public Works manual. That came into effect as of 2009, which was great because they actually have, it's not a how-to step-by-step, we'll look at it, but it does go over the labor codes. It goes over pretty much majority of what's in this presentation. And what I like about it is that it's very easy reading. So it's not like going into a labor code and trying to figure out, what this labor code means. It's just layman terms, just easy reading. We used to complain about not having one. We'd be in seminars and it's like the prime didn't tell us, we have no guide, we have, everything was missing back then. Well, now they have it in place, and ironically, they just updated it last October. They rarely update them, so they also have a new one to cover all of the changes. So we'll look at prevailing wage rates, double and single asterisk. That means your wage is increasable or not. So if your wage rate has a single asterisk, the little star next to it, you use that rate for the life of the project. You stay with that rate. If it has a double, then you've got to go into the predetermined increases and find out when those rates are increasing and by how much. Always remember that the prevailing wage rate applies to the area of the Public Works project. So wherever the construction is happening, that's where, that's the rate that you should use, because we'll see that the rates are set up geographically. So there's like statewide rates that are very industrial. Like a lot of utilities can use those rates. Iron workers use those rates. And then there's rates broken up by regions of California. So it's northern, southern, or San Diego. And then the rates are a little bit harder to follow. They're determined by county. So you can imagine if you're on a Public Works project and you're in San Bernardino, LA, Orange County, Kern County, your rates can look, very scattered all over the place. And from county to county, there's some pretty big differences. So Teamsters, laborers, carpenters, those are all bigger regions. Those are all Southern California, Northern California. Electricians, bricklayers, painters, surveyors, those are all county. Well, let's go to the DIR website and look at that stuff right now so you can see, like a better, the live example of what all this looks like. Because it is by geographics, they do a survey. They request rates. This is how the state gets prevailing wage rates. I've never seen the requests, but apparently they're out there. They're asking the industry, what rate are you paying? The reason why union rates usually become prevailing is because who do you think is giving the answers? The union. That's how they usually become prevailing. There are very few rates out there, and they'll have a note. I don't really see them in California, but they'll have a note that says, they were not from a union, but majority of the rates are coming from the unions because the unions are very organized, and when that information is being requested, they give the answers. Now, I know from my own experience as a small business, that kind of stuff is tough to stay on top of. I'm wearing 10 hats as it is. I'm probably not looking at notices like that, so I can see why the union rates become prevailing, because they're very organized and they know what's happening with the labor law. They structured it. They are in DC. Those union dues are paying for people to stay on top of it. I'm going to say don't go into prevailing wage without having, some type of consciousness that there is some type of union involvement in our prevailing wage system. It doesn't mean that if it's a public works project, that it's a union project, only if it has a PLA, or if it is straight union project like the stadium. SoFi, that was not prevailing. It was private funds, but it was union, collective bargaining agreement. So everybody, non-union could work, but you had to pay the union rates.
Well, pretty much all these big jobs here in Southern California, you're union. The contractor will tell you, you know what, if you're not union, you're not going to be on this job.
Or at least you need to know how to comply. Yeah.
You gotta be union.
Well, if it's private, but it's not, a lot of them are PLA. I will say that if it's private and it's big, it probably is owned by the union. But if it's PLA, you are not required to be a union, but you have to really comply with what's in the PLA. You have to comply with that union agreement. And the unions don't have, like the ones that, and I've been working with the unions on PLA since 2003. So I have my experience in working with the unions. What they want is they don't want, either not, like with the 1800s mindset of like turn them or burn them. They don't have that mentality anymore. They're learning every day more and more about prevailing wage, their part in it. They just want to know that you're complying. They just want to make sure, because the union rates are actually higher most of the time. The union rates, they're increasing all the time. What if you get on a prevailing wage project with the frozen rate, with the single asterisk? I've seen frozen rate projects go on for 5 years. I mean, if you have a good work crew, they're going to stay with you in that rate for 5 years. But what's happening at the union? Their rates are increasing all the time. So the misconception is that they're paying less. Where they are paying less is, and where they have an advantage is because they have an apprenticeship program, and the apprentices can come, the apprentices if they're in a union apprenticeship program, legally, they can be paid less than the journeyman rate. So if they really are good at their work crews, if they're really good at their management, they're going to know how to put a work crew together, and they're going to be able to take advantage of apprentice rates. I'm going to say that's probably the place where they save. Other than that, you could be paying more as a union contractor. So let's go ahead and go to the internet.
Can you explain what special shift?
Yeah, you know what, I just realized that. So here's the thing. Oh my gosh. Here's where it gets tricky, you guys. Prevailing wages can have special shifts. So that means night shift, graveyard. Not all the trades have them, but some do. So you have to know, if you're in this industry, you probably know your trade already. You need to make sure you know it from a public works perspective. 410s are not allowed on public works. So if you have a 410 shift, or if you think that, because your whole crew decides that they want to do it that way because it works for everybody, don't do it. It's not allowed on public works, and changing the rules on public works is a lot trickier than just regular, California labor law is tough as it is. Government money is even tougher. Footnotes, we're going to look at the footnotes. We always want to verify the math. Sometimes the math doesn't add up if you calculate it across the board. There's hidden calculations. We'll look at that. Scope. You should know your own scope. Like, what do you call yourself? Are you a carpenter? Are you a cement mason? Some of those scopes, the task can cross. So it can fall in one trade or another, especially when we get into like the laborers and what they can do in the aspect of concrete versus where did the cement masons take over and where did the carpenters take over. So it's important to not only know, of course you know what you do, but to know it from a prevailing wage perspective. What are we classified as? What trade are we? Scope of work is one of the biggest violations also. So not doing the predetermined increases. An auditor, if I'm an auditor, if I wanted to bust a contractor, if I wanted to see if people are compliant, first thing I'm going to do is see if they increase the rates, if it's a increasable rate. Also, if it's a pretty deep enough audit, scope of work is going to be important. You cannot put specialized labor on the job and classify them all as laborers just because it's physical labor work. We got to know, what do the laborers do? What do the roofers do? It's very task specific. So prevailing wage is task driven. It's not title driven. We don't just go in and say, well, our workers are called this title and then put that on a payroll. No, we got to look at the task associated with the state's classifications, and that's what goes on payroll.
What bureaucracy determines the task of a laborer versus a specialized laborer?
I'm gonna say it happens in DC with the unions. A lot of it happens.
So how do you stay abreast on what's going on? You have to read a union newsletter. Like, how do you get this information?
DIR website. Look at the determinations, and I'm not going to say that all of them, all of the classifications come out of the union, but I'm going to say that majority of them do, because I do see, like, when the unions get in a disagreement over jurisdiction, so what task is my jurisdiction versus what task is yours, there's a process that's called go to the plan, and that means that in DC, they're going to figure that out. So recently, I was involved with kind of watching that whole process when a trade went from, this is graffiti removal. Now they have graffiti removal workers. Graffiti removal started as volunteers. So people who removed graffiti for the cities were volunteers. Then it went to pay. Now they're getting paid to remove graffiti. Then it went to prevailing wage covered. So now it's prevailing wage covered. Nobody's really doing it when it first starts out, but now we're trying to find out how to do it and who gets the work. There's no graffiti, at this time there was no graffiti removal classification. So the battles start to happen and it goes to the plan. So it ends up in 3 different classifications, depending on the method, depending on the type of method and chemicals used. It can be either a laborer, a painter, or a graffiti removal worker. There's 3 classifications now. And so graffiti removal worker has now been added to the determination. At the beginning, it was an interim. They put it up there. The battles were happening. No, the state and the industry is trying to figure out this stuff also as they go along. But from what I've seen, most of how this information, how these tasks end up getting onto the prevailing wage determination is usually, pushed by a big force. It's usually the unions. Like, who knows about the concrete delivery trucks, right? Those were not covered before. And there was a lot of legislation that went back and forth. So I'm going to say maybe like in 2018, around that time frame, it's like you could go on the DIR website and you could see, oh, it's in legislation, it's a no, it's a yes, it's a no, it's a yes. Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, those concrete trucks that have like the spinning, here goes where I'm not a construction worker, that big spinning thing on the back, those are now prevailing wage. Yeah, and they weren't prevailing wage covered before.
But they were union members, some of them were.
Yeah, some of them are, and Teamsters probably has it, because the Teamsters are drivers. So if you're union, you probably were already covering it anyway, but if you're non-union, now at the very least, it's prevailing wage covered.
And earlier, if you were on a union job, you weren't gonna get non-union cement trucks on that job.
Yeah, well,
You won't allow it.
but a union job is different than public works. So that's a very good point. Don't confuse a public works job with a union job. There's differences. Public works is our government money, and it doesn't mean you have to be union. There may be some things happening out there where it'd probably be your best interest to be union.
Did we touch on the special shift?
Yeah, we'll touch on this special shift. So the headquarters of prevailing wage in California is San Francisco. So when I have worked with companies up in the Northern California area, even if they're not union, they're paying the union wage. Because like he said, there's this idea first of all, that Public Works is union, which is not really true, but also it could be a union job if it's private. It could have, where you have to be union, or you could be in an environment where it's so heavily unionized that in order to be safe, maybe you just want to pay the union rate. Just, it's easier sometimes, especially on your office staff, or out there, in the job site where they're going to be on your job more, maybe if you're not. Because one thing I do have to say about the union, which falls down to the union contractors, is again, don't disregard them in Public Works. They created our labor law system. So they know how it works, and there could be a higher chance that a contractor is compliant if they're union because they're already in alignment. So it's probably, 95% compliant already if they're union.
Veronica, the reason I'm speaking about special shift, see, I've been union member for 20 years. I am union contractor with the operators and laborers.
Oh, nice.
So I know your special shift too. If your shift starts at 9 a.m., you got to pay them more money than them starting at 7 a.m.
Right, and so here, here's the thing. If you're a union and you're on a Public Works project, you have to comply with both. If you're not union, then you don't have to comply, and you're on a Public Works project, you're just complying with the state law. You're not complying with that. So the union is very specific, and you got to watch out for this on PLA projects, because they could have a rule where if you go on site and you work over a certain amount of hours, you always get paid for 8. Cement masons have that. 6 hours, paid for 8. It doesn't matter if there's no work and the crew gets set.
4, 6, 8.
Exactly. PLAs will have something similar lined out in that, like, the show up pay or there's just, more, the rules get more detailed in the collective bargaining agreements, the union agreements, and as opposed to the labor law. So the labor law is more vague, and, there's the gray areas, there's reading between the lines. They're not going to enforce as much. Like for union, foremans have a higher pay. In prevailing wage, the maximum enforcement rate is journeyman rate. So on a straight up prevailing wage project, it's no PLA, not unionized, it's a non-union contractor. That maximum rate that is enforced in a state audit is journeyman. Now, if you're union, and you're paying a foreman a journeyman rate, you're going to pass your state audit, but you're not going to pass your union audit, because a union is looking at things differently. That's where you got to be careful also as a union contractor and as a non-union contractor, taking advice from the unions. With all due respect to the unions, they're awesome at what they do. I go to them for scope of work questions. The state goes to them for scope of work questions. But there are some variances, and you want to make sure that if you're on a Public Works project, you're complying with prevailing wage, which is probably the same as the union, but since my money is on the line, I'm going to verify.
If I hear you correct, if you run into that situation and you verify it, you can be confident that everyone else that's bidding on that project is looking at the same information and bidding the same thing. The reason I ask is because if you're bidding those verified amounts and someone else is bidding a lesser amount, like say they don't include the union rate,
Yeah.
they can submit that and win?
The bid?
Yeah.
Yes. If it's on the lowest bidder. Because whoever is, so what is there's best value, the type of bidding wars that are out there, or the type of bidding methods that the agencies, that the government employs, could be best value, which is really nice, because if you've been in there for a while and you have a good record, OSHA, compliance, all these things, then your points may be higher and you may have a better chance of getting that job even if you're not the lowest bidder. But a lot of them are still lowest bid. And in the award room at the agency's office, they're not going to do the homework to see if you put the correct rates. Whatever you bid is what you bid. Now, because of that, and because the industry has gotten so stringent and the audits have increased so much, the penalties have increased so much, I never saw this back in the day, but I see it today more and more. Contractors are initiating audits on each other. So before,
Say that again.
contractors are initiating audits on each other.
They rat each other out.
You know why? Because it's literally their business survival.
Well, I ain't gonna, because of the situation I just.
Because it's gotten, before people could bid in the cost of penalties and still be competitive. Before, people could just really undercut. I mean, I don't hear anymore. I just went and got workers from Home Depot. I used to hear that back when I was in the enforcement office. I'd be like, don't say that. Because we also want to make sure that we're legally, like check stubs and just W-2, all of that goes with basic labor law. But before, audits were what we called worker-driven. So before, the way that audits happened was workers complained. That was pretty much the way that all the audits were triggered, and they would come in and we'd see them in enforcement or even in the Prime's office. I make sure, like I've got arrangements with the Primes. If we have labor issues out there, come to us and we'll fix it. Like I'd rather fix it internally. And that's our job as contractors, is if we make a mistake, we have the opportunity to correct it. And then if we make those corrections, certain corrections we can do, and if we make those corrections before an audit happens, they won't penalize for us. So if we find out internally that we paid the wrong rate, we hurry up and issue back pay, it's called restitution, to make it compliant and keep all that proof on hand. And then if we go into audit, they can say, oh yeah, well you underpaid here, but you fixed it, so we're not going to penalize you. But now it's not only worker driven, but it's union driven through the apprenticeship forms, and it's contractor driven. And going, back to the scenario of like even new classifications coming out, like graffiti removal workers, and while all of that is happening and things are really getting cleaned up, the sad part is I have seen contractors who are compliant get outbid, and it really becomes a necessity to the survival of their business, which could be decades, generations. And now all of a sudden, because there's all these compliance rules and not everybody has caught up, they could be at a disadvantage. And I've seen where other competitors who are not compliant are taking all the jobs. And they've gotten to the point where before it was kind of like everybody's in the same, playing field. We kind of know what's going on with other contractors. Workers will go from one company to another, and it's like, oh, well, I'm getting more here. Then it's like, what do you mean you're getting more here? It's all prevailing wage. So at the previous company, they weren't paying correctly. So I mean, we've always known that kind of, but now it's gotten so like dog eat dog, where it's like, I'm sorry, but I'm not going down. If you're not compliant, we've got to trigger, and so they're triggering audits on each other.
Along with my other question.
Yes.
If that guy wins it, the one that low bid, but not complying to the union rate, and he's caught.
Right.
Am I hearing you right that contractor now has to pay that rate plus the bill?
Yes, if they're caught, if they go into audit, yes.
Oh, I see why I rat. Call me King Rat.
Yeah, because you need, well, the whole point of behind prevailing wage is
exactly.
equal playing field. That's why, again, the unions are not looking for turn and burn. They just want to make sure that
We're paying them.
exactly, that their members, they're competitive, that they're in a competitive arena, because then it goes down to management and that type of stuff.
Couldn't that be a strategy, theoretically, to underbid and then, as long as you fix it in time, where you get the job and then you also fix it so you don't have I don't know. That sounds like a good workaround.
Well, here's the thing. You could, but you're not going to be able to build the agency beyond what you bid.
Right.
So, yeah, then you're going to have to take them.
Never get accepted again.
Yeah, so you can't, that is, but you're going to be in some trouble, because then now where's the money going to come from? Yeah, I mean, how many people got caught up in the like the pre-COVID bids, and then the prices went up, and you know, like suddenly a walk-in freezer is 30,000 more, and the agencies wouldn't honor the pre-COVID price. So the agencies are pretty cutthroat with bidding. Actually, it's pretty sad because I see a lot of contractors who are having to comply more and more and more and more, and even pay people like us. Now a whole nother, I mean, who would have thought, you know, like a business would be in existence just for this paperwork? And it's like a maze figuring out how to be compliant. A lot of contractors want to be, but they don't know how, or they don't have the time. They're building. You know, that's why they're building. They didn't like being stuck in the office doing paperwork. So I am trying to get to, yes.
Before you move on,
Uh-huh.
I have a question related to specialty shifts and touching a bit upon the we've already discussed as far as the video rule work in the training field. So, for instance, one example that I think you thought was, you know, if you have a special shift and it's a non-union shop, or not, I'm sorry, a non-union business that's involved in, that has contracts in the landscaping and painting field. And then just to add a caveat, one, let's say the painting is living wage and then landscape is prevailing wage. Can you get by where some of this work is specialty in terms of if you're going to be using the removal of labor wage determination, that person is going to have to be specific to that work. Is there a scenario where you can use that person for half of the day on that job and then move forward on a landscaping job?
Yeah, so you're going from public to private in the same day?
Yeah, well, it can be public to private, and then it can also be public to public.
Public, yeah, you can do that, but if you're not union, because if you're union, it's probably in your agreement that every job that you have is the same, you know, the same rate. But if you're a contractor on just prevailing wage, they can be a, you know, like a cement mason for 4 hours and then an operator for another 2 hours. Or they can be on a prevailing wage job for, you know, 4 hours, and then they go and move to another job that doesn't have prevailing wage, and we're only looking at general labor law, city. I do see that, city wages, and then that applies. So yes, that can occur. In the DIR manual, there is a method for calculating overtime if the work is on the same day, public and private. So there are very specific methods for finding the correct rate when it falls into the overtime. Sure. So, let's see, 9. Are we going to go straight through, or are we going to take a quick break? It's up to you guys. Okay, we'll go. Let's go straight through then, because we're going to get into the prevailing wage rates now. So it's a little bit, you know, it's kind of like hard to follow sometimes. But so what you should get out of this class is not so much every step. You know, don't think or expect yourself to come out remembering or knowing prevailing wage. But I want you to understand some of the basic concepts, definitely the areas where violations happen, and really just the culture and the industry, especially here in California, because that's what this is based on. This is based on California, or also we're going to hit the federal part. So if you're doing prevailing wage in Nevada, in Oregon, somewhere else, you got to look at what's happening in that state. California, what they say is if you can do prevailing wage in California, you can do it in any state. We are the strictest. So when it comes to wages, city wages, prevailing wages versus federal, usually California is the highest. Again, what do we always want to do? We always want to do our homework. On occasion, I will see a higher federal rate, but that's very rare. And mixed projects, federal and funding, I'm going to say are not the most common. I see a lot of federal money right now on housing. So it could be, you know, like the type of, I know there's a lot of initiatives that have come out and we'll go over them tomorrow. So, you know, you kind of learn like the type of agencies and projects that you take on, and they can be very consistent. And then it'll be easier for you to you know, to know like what the requirements are and how to get the correct rate. So this is the DIR website, www.dir.ca.gov. That's where we need to be. We need to be, I'm going to say for labor compliance, if you are fortunate enough to have somebody in the office who is doing this for you, the pluses is, of course, a very strong admin. You know, it's somebody who's good at crunching numbers if they come from the payroll department, and who can, you know, it would be to your benefit to pay them to attend seminars. The state is giving a lot of free ones right now, or to give them time to get to know this website, because this website is where all the information is. It's the state's website. So we're going to go to today, we're going to go to prevailing wage determinations. Or here we can go to Public Works. And it has a lot of what was on the slides. Here's where the training seminars are listed. They just had one last week. I think they're having another one like in a couple of months. We're going to go to contractors.
Minimum wage?
Prevailing wage. So we're going to, did you go to Public Works?
Yes.
Let me start over. www.dir.ca.gov. And then go in the employer section to the last link, that Public Works. And then once we're on the Public Works page, a lot of information, but what we want is we want to go to the contractors link, because we want to look at a prevailing wage determination. That's what we're on right now. We're on these rates. Here, register as a Public Works contractor. Here's what we were talking about earlier to register. The registrations are coming up. They usually expire June 30th. Now you can pay a couple years in advance, so you don't have to renew every year. Oh, there it goes. But so that's where the registration is. But what we want to look at is we want to look at prevailing wage rates. So apprentice rates are its own link. They have their own wage schedules because they do get paid less. They get paid a percentage of what the journeyman rate is. So we're going to go into the journeyman rates. And now here is where when I had mentioned there's 2 determinations issued per year. So in 2024, on February 22nd, 2024-1 came out. On August 22nd, 2024-2 will come out. So the 2 determinations, they're labeled as year, dash, and then whether it was the first one or the second one. Let's go to, just so you can see it, superseded. So see, here's all of the previous determinations. So if your job was bid on February 23rd, it was advertised for bid, we're still going to be in 2023-2 because the determination got issued on February 22nd and it became in effect 10 days after that. So these, right now, if I'm looking at prevailing wage rates, I'm probably going to be in this section more. And then as time goes, 2024-1 is going to pop up more and more. But let's go into a previous. So whatever was current at the time your project was advertised for bid is the determination you want to use.
And Veronica, we don't have, if a determination comes out later and it raises the prevailing wage, we don't have to meet that.
I'm going to show you. You stay in your contract and your determination because the increases are listed in there.
Okay.
So we're going to look at that. So let's look at we're going to dig a little deeper into the rates, but just to give an overall idea, see, here's what's happening in statewide. In statewide, we have Boilermaker, we have a lot of utility companies, iron worker, metal roofing, telecommunications technicians. These are utilities. So I'm in this one less. For iron worker, I'm usually here. On and off hauling, that is there. That's the one that came out recently where the cement mix trucks and the dump trucks are covered under here. They added these. So here's the thing: if you're part of the Teamsters union, then you are following your union contract, and these are going to be covered under your union scope of work, and they're going to give you the rates to pay. But if you're not union, here's where you would find the rates. But with dump trucks, with these type of scenarios, especially if you're not union, it's going to be very specific. Like dump truck has to be truly, what is it that you're dumping in order for it to fall under a dump truck and not something else. So, there's very specific rules. Like mixer trucks, you can use that trade if you're a cement company. You provide cement to the job sites. But where it starts crossing the line, because these rates are not as high. These rates are not as high as like maybe the union rates. Where you start to be careful and cross into other classifications, or start having more scrutiny on how it's covered, how the pay works, is if you're delivering cement, you're a mixer truck, you pull up to the job site, and maybe the most labor you're going to do is push a button. Don't get out of that mixer truck and start helping to work with the cement, because now you could be a cement mason or a laborer. So, especially when you're dealing with lower, these rates are catching up. They were a lot lower before, but $45 an hour for for a total rate is probably less than what the Teamsters are having their signatory contractors pay. So anytime we're dealing with a rate that is significantly lower, it's very specific how it can be used. So you got to read the scopes of work, and the state does provide the scope of work. So let's go into a different, yes.
Question about dump trucks, like the semantics behind it. Are they talking about like a Super 10 dump truck versus like an end up high side? Like how do they determine?
We would have to look at let's see. You see here, scope.
Can we look at the dump truck specifically?
Yeah, yes. And we might have to, here's where if it's not clear, I start calling around to find out. Usually, like I would call, if it's not clear in the scope of work, I would call the Teamsters Union, or I would write a letter to the state. I would call the state. But if the state doesn't know, they're going to go to the Teamsters Union. So they're going to go to whatever union is, the specialty in that trade. So let's look at, where are we? We'll just look at this Central California. So here's what it has for this. So it's not very detailed. It may or may not answer like the size of the truck, what you're talking about, but we can get answers from other sources if we have to dig deeper. And so what happens is what the state does, and this one is not, this one may or may not be, it should say.
Well, truck equipped with dump body versus a truck pulling a trailer that has a wet kit that's dump, like an end-dump trailer?
Yeah, whatever it says here. So here you see the scope of work. The information in this packet is not based on a collective bargaining agreement. But I can tell you that questions will get deferred to the union. I would go to the state first. There's a way where we can write them, or or I would go to the union. But it'll tell you if it's part of the collective bargaining agreement, and what happens is the CBAs, the union's agreements, let's say they're 20 pages, whatever the state endorses is what applies as far as scope goes. So the state might take 2 pages out of the agreement. Now this one happens to not fall. This is not based on the union collective bargaining agreement, but most of the trades are based out of the scope of work comes from the union agreement. It just depends on what part of the agreement the state wants to endorse and make applicable on public works. So let's grab a different, we're going to go to a Southern California trade, and let's look at laborers.
I was gonna tell you that, Ron.
Labor?
Because see, you gotta be, this is good, because on this right here, it pretty much explains everything to you, and you gotta be careful, because if you hire on their website, let's say a demolition labor, they'll have, I believe it's group 1, which is less money, but as soon as you put that labor on a jackhammer,
It's
you're gonna start paying them.
Exactly.
Group 4.
And that's why I chose labor, because we're going to look at the groups. And then remember too, if you're union, you need to go through the details to find out how that relates to prevailing wage. Because and not all of the auditors are like, they don't always know all of the union differences in the scope of work. But maybe the union, if you got an audit and they misclassified you according to what your union told you, now you really have some homework, because you need to find out, did your union accidentally misinform you? Because maybe it's good in a purely union world, but it might be different in public works. See, anytime you're dealing with multiple contracts, you need to compare the two to make sure, that you're compliant with the higher of the two, whatever's going to be the stricter. So here,
Can I say something real quick?
uh-huh.
On these public work jobs, federal jobs, I'll use one example, the Crenshaw Alley X line. Metro end up suing Wash, the general contractor, right, the prime, right? Because some foremen would tell the guys, here, we're not gonna take lunch, it's a Friday, sign a paper and I'll let you leave early.
Yeah, don't
Okay.
do that.
These laborers end up complaining.
Yep.
I end up getting some of the lawsuits. They end up paying over $25 million in penalties.
Wow.
Or I didn't even work for that contractor no more. I end up getting $500. So
Yeah.
distributed. So just be aware when you have people doing this stuff. We're gonna skip lunch, or you go home early
Well,
the next day or not. No.
Yeah, and that goes back to not being able to write the law out of our contracts or out of our daily practices. And even though it may work great for everybody, like you said, probably everybody was on board with it at the time, but for some reason,
Metro wasn't.
somebody, either the agency or even a worker, could change their mind. And that goes back to basic labor code. That's even, an easier labor law than public works, than government, where it's like, we're expected to know our basic labor law when we're engaged in public works. We've got labor law, and then we've got prevailing wage law. And if I'm a contractor and I'm going to have a lawyer on as my consultant or my payroll, or if I go into a heavy audit, I want a prevailing wage lawyer. It's a different scenario. I back in my early days at corporations, I was running their prevailing wage meetings because they only had general labor law on, and I knew the culture of the industry, how the laws were being applied in the gray areas, and that should have never been, because I'm not a lawyer. You need a prevailing wage lawyer if you ever get into a scenario where it's time to lawyer up. So let's look at the determination, okay? Let's dissect it. Labor and craft-related classifications, that # hashtag means that that craft is apprenticeable. So that means that the laborers have an apprenticeship. If there's no hashtag, that means there's no apprenticeship. Determinations, so this came out, these wages, this sheet of paper that is digital to us, actually was the 2023-1 determination. So here's what where people make mistakes, is that they don't always redo this form every time they issue. This could be used maybe in about 2 or 3 links. So just because I went into the 2023-2 link, but here it says 2023-1. So we have to be careful when we're following that we know what link we clicked on, because this is deceiving. It's confusing. So even though it says 2023-1, we actually are in 2023-2, but it just carried over. At some point, they'll draft a new one.
Veronica, notice on there, it has your overtime, Saturday, double time and all that. But notice, it doesn't have the special treat hours now.
We'll get into that. Yeah, we'll get into that. So here is where we talk about the double and single asterisk. This is double asterisk. So this means that there are increases that are gonna, so here's where we talk about with bidding, okay? We don't want to, if we're bidding at a certain point in time, we're not gonna know what's on the website in a year from now anyway. You know, like we're not fortune tellers, but they tell us through the double asterisk, and we'll see where we can get that, because if it's a union and they're working with the state, they're giving the state, as they bargain and they know what those rates are going to be, they're providing that information to the state, and the state turns around and provides it to us for bidding purposes. So here it tells you the locality, so what area these rates cover. And then here we're looking at the classification. So if we're doing our reporting, we're going to do a laborer, and we always put what group number, and we'll see what that means as far as group number. But here's what's important with prevailing wage rate. You have your there's 3 components to prevailing wage rate. You have your basic hourly rate, you have your fringe benefits, and your total hourly rate. You could never, ever, ever pay less than total hourly rate. But how you get to that is going to depend on your scenario within your company. How we get to the total hourly rate depends if we're union, non-union, or if we're non-union, but we pay into plans. So a lot of contractors who don't know this system, or they are deliberately undercutting, they'll take the prevailing wage determination and they'll pay the base hourly rate. And they don't provide fringes, and they just leave this whole part out. That's wrong. That's a violation. And that's, again, a first place that an auditor is going to look at. What is happening with fringe benefits is important in knowing whether or not we're compliant. So it's now, this rate, this gets confusing when you look at it, because a lot of contractors pay the total hourly rate, but on their reporting, they report it like this, how it's laid out in the determination. This determination is catered to a union wage scale. So this is what the union wage scale looked like at some point in time. The union...
What's the current rate right now, the scale right now, 4138 for Group 1?
The union, if you're a signatory or you're on a PLA, so here's the difference: when you have a PLA project, you cannot cash out the fringe benefits anymore. You can't pay the total hourly rate to the workers. You've got to pay the fringe benefits to the union trust. So if you're signatory, you're paying, unless you want to pay more because for whatever reason that worker, you're deciding to pay them more, you're paying the base rate. That's probably their check rate, what you see on the check stub. And all of these fringe benefit components are being paid through to the union trust via monthly reporting. So if I am a non-union contractor and I just signed up for a project that has a labor agreement, so now I'm union for that project only. Previously, I had the option to cash out the fringe benefits, basically. You're going to cash them out if you want to. And they were getting this on their paycheck. Now, per the PLA, if I give them that, I'm still going to have to pay the fringe benefits to the union, so I'm going to be way overpaid, probably going to lose money. So what's going to happen is the change, and I would notify workers of this coming up because that's a big difference for somebody's, like weekly take-home pay to go from 41 to 68. All of these are going to have to be done after the month ends, usually by about mid-month, the 10th or the 15th of the month. We're going to have to go in and we're going to have to report by worker how many hours they worked, and that monthly report is going to get paid. So these go through the union trust. So that's like a difference in the pay structure. There's a slide that we're going to look at where it breaks it out more.
Veronica, so if I'm not a union contractor, right? But I'm on a union job.
Right.
Those fringes go to their employees that are on my payroll for that project. They're union. What if I never do another union job?
If you never do another union job?
Never bid and win another union job. What happens to those benefits for those employees?
They're probably never they're going to lose out on medical because they're not going to bank, depending on how long the job is. So I shouldn't say that, I should backtrack that. Depending on how long the job is. If the way that the benefits work is typically from the unions whose fringe benefits I've worked with and I'm very familiar with, and there's quite a few of them, they have to accrue a certain number of hours in order for the medical to kick in.
300 hours.
But it's union specific, so it depends on the union. So if you're on a very long PLA job, they'll probably get all their benefits. I don't see them lose out on pension. Usually there's a way, let's say it's a short job. Let's say it's a 2-month job. They didn't bank enough hours to become eligible for medical, but they can talk to the union trust and they could find out how to get their pension. So yeah, that's the downside.
I'm sorry. Young man, and I address you as a young man because I know I'm probably the oldest in the room.
Yes, sir.
It sounds like to me, and this is just what I'm getting, it's best that you go ahead and be a union shop.
Well, to me, like I said, I've been a member for 20 years. My goal was always be a union contractor. I believe in paying my guys good money for their families. Okay, I know Chris Jensen. You know Chris Jensen from the city, the compliance main guy?
Yeah, his name is familiar, yeah.
Okay, I deal with him. I've known him for 50 years. I ran work for 20 years as a foreman. Okay, you can bid on a job, right? As a non-union contractor. So how she made that scale, right? One labor is $41, but the total package is $68.
Right.
You can pay him the 40-something dollars, right, in a check. You can pay him the rest, his pension and all that, separately. He can do whatever he wants with that money, as long as you paid him.
Right.
He can invest that money in his pension, his retirement, his medical. You did your job, right?
Right.
But what the city and what all these agencies want, that out of that money, you take away 75 cents an hour and send it to the state of California for their training or apprentice program that they have.
Okay.
So, like I said, as long as you pay him the $63, then you pay him this $43, what it is in 40 hours, let's say $1,000. Then the rest, you give it to him in a separate check, and he can do whatever. He can go buy drugs with that money. He can invest it. He can do whatever. You did your job, right? As long as you have a record, say, look, I paid him his hourly wage. I paid his pension, his Medi-Cal. What he did with it is his. I did my job. Every hour I saved $75 and I sent it to the state of California. Here are my records. That's all the city.
But I would caution one thing about that is that it's rare, but I have seen where contractors do pay the fringe benefit in a separate check. I don't know how that works out tax-wise, because that separate check is not actually like a medical or pension plan. So I would talk to my tax person before doing that structure.
What's in my mind is, because I worked for the city for 25 years.
Right.
IBEW, I was a union.
Right.
So everything just came out of our check.
Right.
What I'm saying is, and that's why I want to ask you, it appears as if I'm bidding public works, and some projects are union, some are not. It's best, thanks, that I become a union shop. That way, when I'm bidding these jobs, my guys that I'm paying, they're covered. I don't have to I don't have to keep going. I don't have to keep jumping in and jumping out, jumping in and jumping out, and doing, because that sounds more complicated than if I'm just union shop, bidding the job, paying that rate, I'm done.
And that's why, honestly, that's why I did it too,
That-
because
now that
Well,
makes sense.
after tomorrow's presentation, you're probably going to feel 100% even stronger about the statement you just made. I am unbiased. So I am unbiased.
It's
It's a,
asking Roman so that you wouldn't be caught in the middle.
well, and but here's the thing. I'm just going to give you the mechanics of each, and then you decide for your shop whether it's union or non-union. But I'm going to say that as the state evolves and more labor laws come out, more and more contract laws, it's really hard to comply if you're not union. It's very difficult to comply. You can do it, but you're going to have a lot more challenges. You can do it though, but you got to know how, and it's a lot of work. So let's say, okay, so for this particular classification, this is how they get. Goes back to the point of being task driven. So for laborers, operators, and I want to say teamsters, you have group numbers. So see, the task within each group determines the pay for that laborer. So beyond being a laborer, we're going to find out what group the laborer falls under. A lot of your basic labor work will fall under group 1, but look at all these other, like concrete cutting is group 4. I mean, you have to be careful and you have to increase the wage according to the group. So that's one classification that has some more details about the type of the way that we classify them, which links directly into their pay. So we always want to look too at the footnotes. So when we're finding out our prevailing wage rate, footnotes are important. Okay, so this footnote C, any hours worked over 12 hours in a single workday are double time. So most of the time the footnotes are going to default to your basic labor law, but sometimes they're not. They're going to be higher, or they're going to be stricter if we're doing a prevailing wage project. So like was mentioned earlier, let's go back to looking at the rates. Okay, so for basic California labor law, it's over 8 hours a day or 40 hours in a week. Overtime kicks in. But for prevailing wage has most of the trades. Remember, we always have to research. Saturday has its own rate, regardless if you hit the 40 hours or not during the week. So that's one example where the rates can be higher on prevailing than your regular labor law. Here's another thing, and this goes, I'm going to say this is a very good thing that goes in the favor of when you're paying fringe benefits to a union, to the trust. They're very organized. Everything that, as far as paying to the union trust, is going to be in compliance with the labor laws. So when you're paying these fringe benefits to the trust, it lowers your workers' comp, because your workers' comp is based on payroll. So here's payroll, $41 an hour versus $68 an hour. Also, your payroll taxes. If you're paying $68 an hour and you're being taxed on that, your workers and the employer portion, then that's going to be a higher tax than $41 an hour. So in that way, it's simpler. But then, if you do decide to go union, or you go on a PLA, a unionized project, be ready to do the monthly reporting, because now you have to go in. Payroll is going to be simpler for me if I just go in and bang out the $68.39.
Could I say something else?
But hold on one second, please. But if I'm paying union wages, then I've got to make sure that I go in and do my reporting and that everything matches up, because the unions usually do audit every year. Go ahead.
Another thing, you got to look on your contract, because you're entitled to pay them 40 hours after, overtime after 40 hours. But look in the contract, because I know Metro, they're good for this. If it's raining, right, and you can't work, they'll have you come in on Saturday to make up for that day, and you don't have to pay your laborers or your whole crew operators, carpenter, you don't have to pay them that overtime.
Good.
Because it's in the contract, because it was a rainy day, right, you weren't able to work, so you come in on Saturday, they're not gonna have you come in on Sunday, but let's say on a Saturday, you don't have to pay them overtime. So look on your contract, right?
Well, see, that's in the prevailing wage determination. So anything to do with rates on a prevailing wage job, you want to look at the determination. If you're a union, then you've got to look at that contract as well because you're in contract with them. But for here, Saturdays in the same work week maybe work straight time if job is shut down to inclement weather. So, but not all trades have this. So it's very trade specific. So laborers can be different than roofers. Also, sometimes there's an allowance for a special work week. Let's say it's dangerous for the crew to be there on a Friday. It might be for whatever reason with that agency better on a Saturday. Then you could work with the agency. And again, it's trade specific. Can we have an alternate work schedule where we go into Saturday and it's not time and a half, but everything is specific to the trade and a lot of times, like you said, the agency, because there's a lot of big agencies out there that have their own programs. So let's look at the county, let's look at the county rates. Okay, so far we looked at statewide. Now then we looked at Southern California. Now let's go to rates that are determined by county. So we're going to go to LA County. Let's go to the county that we're in. Let's go to electrician. So the county rate schedule, as you can see, it has a different layout, right? So it looks different than what we saw with the laborers. It's the same thing, it's just laid out differently. We still have the craft, the classification. Some of these have sub-classifications, like with electrician. There's a few different types of electrician, and the rates are different. So we have the classification. We have, we have the issue date, so the date that the rate came out. Look at all of these are double asterisks. So far, all of those rates are increasing, and we're going to show you that. I'm going to show you that because that's right in this determination. So let's see, do we have any single asterisks? I don't see any on here. This is all okay, there we go. Yep, painter. Painter has a single, so that rate would remain for the life of the project. If you're a non-union contractor, if you're a signatory to a union, you got to look at this, but you also have to look at your union agreement. Or if you're on, PLAs, the language that I've always seen on a PLA is that the prevailing wage rates are enforced, but when we get into that tomorrow, we'll talk about that. Let's go to, let's see. Footnotes, again, follow all the footnotes. So in the electrician's determination, if I add up, so you have to be careful when you're crunching your rates, because on the electricians, if I add up the base, the health and welfare, the pension, the other, it doesn't equal the total hourly rate, because there's a footnote in pension that there's 3% that goes to the NEBF It's 3% of the base wage, and that's how you come up with the total. So I tell you that not so you can remember electricians specifically, just so that you understand that when you're dealing with crunching rates, it's math. And you got to look at the footnotes and see what, so because I wouldn't want you to like pay all of these individually and then come up short because you didn't crunch it and it doesn't equal the prevailing wage rate. Now, so these are your county rates, and there are, let me see, let's go to the predetermined increases. So you can see what it's going to look like for bidding. So increase is its whole separate link, and it tells you how much to increase when, or if it has a footnote to call the state or email the state when the increase becomes due, so you can see how to allocate it. Let's look at, like bricklayer. The increase on 5/1/2024 was $2.20, but at footnote 8, I'll tell you right now that that's going to say to call the state when it becomes due to find out where that $2.20 goes. That's important. If you're a union contractor, your union's going to automatically, it's going to be included in the reporting you do. It's going to already be allocated. If you're a non-union contractor and you pay the total rate, I say it's important to find out the amount of the increase, even if you're cashing out your fringe benefits, because what if this increase is in training? Okay, so training, the training funds are part of the apprenticeship compliance, and it's the only thing that we can deduct from the workers' pay if we're non-union, and we send it to the state. So we'll get more into that, but there's an issue of training funds. So here, let's look at another trade. Let's go back to my buddies at the IBW. So let's say inside wiremen, our Sparkies. This is probably from their collective bargaining agreement, but you can see that you're bidding. It's a long project, so we're going to assume that all of these increases fall within. Look at all the increases. $129, $2, $729, $205, $127, $2, $728, $2, $126, $2026, $2. If we bid and we didn't know about the predetermined increases, we're missing a lot of money right here. A lot of money. So it's very important to pay attention to that single and double asterisk if you are a public works non-union contractor. You still need to pay attention even if you are union. It's very rare, but it does happen where the union rate can be a few cents less. So there's one, and I can't remember if it's the operators. The contractor has to pay that extra cents into the base wage because they're on the fringe benefits, they're like 5 cents short. So it's small. Some auditors may call it de minimis, and maybe they won't charge you for it. But we don't know for sure, because if they want to be very black and white, 5 cent underpayment is a 5 cent underpayment. So even if you're union, when for my union contractor clients, I always crunch the rates to make sure that they're consistent with the prevailing wage rate.
So Veronica, you get penalized if you're 5 cents under?
You can, it depending on the auditor. And here's the tough part is the auditing is getting more clear. The rules are getting more defined, but you would not believe how much gray is in the law. The laws are written, but how we apply them can also be very important because, from auditor to auditor, they may have a certain focus. And I've seen different auditors audit using different methods. The last updated DIR manual that came out, I really like it because they're getting more specific, where they're laying out the methods more and more, and that gives some consistency over at the state office. But remember, back to the recession and the state taking this over. The state didn't always do this. when the recession hit and the labor laws changed, the penalties increased, the enforcement increased. Also, the state took over the enforcement. Prior to that time frame, it was an initiative called SBX 9, where they deemed third-party labor compliance programs costly, and I forgot what else they put in there. But basically, the enforcement, there's still third parties, but the state was taking over the enforcement. And we were seeing the state make requests to the public saying, how do we do this? Help us out here. Because the third party companies were doing the compliance. Now the state has taken over. Since then, the state has done a great job of taking over, organized. The website is getting more and more information. The manuals are out there. The websites are increasing as far as like being user friendly. So they are taking over, but again, it's always evolving. And at that time frame, that was a huge change, because you're talking going from third party companies to the state of California. Big difference. So let's see. I'm going to go back to, is there any questions on prevailing wage rate? Also, another thing to be careful of. Okay, so we have the, let me see, the special shifts we can find in, so we're in.
Do you know who gets to decide on when a project uses that or not? Is it the agency or?
It's the agency.
And can they, you know, if they can change midway through a project whether they're not less contractors use?
I would think they would be able to. I don't know for sure, but I would think, because it's really just the reporting mechanism. It's not, I've never seen that happen.
Hey, Veronica, you got a new client now.
Oh, nice.
I don't want to deal with the paperwork. I'd rather pay extra and have you guys do it.
Trust me,
So let me have a business card.
Okay.
Today, please.
Okay. And you said what union are you with?
I'm with Laborers. I'm a member of
Oh,
Local
that's
Laborers.
labeled
And then
Local 300?
Yeah, and I'm signatory with them and with the operators, Local 12.
Oh, got it. So with Local 12, I'm working a lot right now with Justin. Justin, he's the rep.
Is he?
Yeah, he's the rep. I'm working with him a lot right now on a Long Beach job.
Oh, he's in the Harbor area then, huh?
Yeah, I don't know if he's only in that area. I think he's LA
Is
too.
it Pasadena, Local 12 Pasadena over there too, or is it a different?
It's Local 12.
It's Local 12.
It's local, but sometimes I notice they have like mini chapters.
chapters,
Yeah,
yeah.
because the interesting thing is Local 300 for the Long Beach job is Local 1309.
Well, Local 300 for the studio laborers?
Yeah,
They're Local 300, but they're not our union.
yeah,
That's their union. So they're
yeah.
separate
It's
unions.
yeah.
Studio laborers? Yeah.
So the. Oh yes, sure. So the only time that we're working for the Long Beach job with Local 300 is if it has lead and asbestos. So if it's hazmat, we go to Local 300. But if it's regular within the groups, we go to Local 1309. Eddie Rivera.
Okay.
He's our rep over there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for the operators, it's Justin. But with Local 300, I go way back with Ricardo Andrade.
Andrade.
Yeah.
I used to work with Ricardo.
Yeah, Ricardo. That was like my first PLA project.
We worked on 2 projects before he became a BA, and I stayed on the field. I became a foreman, and then, But I'm gonna get your call. I'm gonna pass
Yeah.
your number to our
Okay.
union so they could call you, because I think they could use you too.
Trust me, I work with it. I'm telling you, I call them when it's scope of work questions, because those gray areas, and if contractors ask me and they want advice, I want to make sure I'm giving it.
You as a consultant,
Yeah,
which they need, like me being a new contractor now.
right.
They can say, here, call Veronica.
Yeah.
She can help you.
Yeah, so it was the laborers, the plumbers, and the iron workers that I almost consulted with.
Not Veronica, I checked online for certified payroll
Good.
people. I can't find nobody.
Oh.
Nobody.
So I think here's what happened, and I don't like, there's enough work to go around. We try to streamline. We don't generate extra work in our office. We're busy. We're actually not even able to help the contractors who aren't, we're at least working towards getting better, because we don't have time for audits, especially self-triggered audits. So we're in a sinker, we're in an environment where if we're not already structured for prevailing wage, we got to at least work towards getting everything cleaned up, because it's just so much.
That's why I asked you if it's easier with union and non-union contractors. To me, I think it would be easier.
There's less, yeah, it's a little safer, it's less compliance, but again, I'm unbiased, you know, it's a business decision and they can survive, but you'll see in tomorrow's presentation where the more and more the way that the laws are evolving, it's almost going to be impossible. It's very small. We would need more, of apprenticeships out there. We need more apprenticeship programs out there. And I know that, you know, like the state, the programs are doing their best to keep up, but it's hard to keep up with the apprenticeship right now.
Is this service that you offer, Veronica, the same as ADP, or?
No, so the difference is ADP will give you like your payroll, but we do the, and they might even do certified payroll because they're starting to catch on to this prevailing wage. But what we do is we take the payroll and we make it compliant with certified payroll for the prevailing wage. So they might not be compliant. They might not know like the footnotes, the wages, the increases. They're going to tell you, they're going to pay what you tell them to pay. So when our clients have paychecks, ADP, we work with them and we love working with them, but we're usually telling them what rate to pay.
Okay, so it would be a lot better to use.
Yeah, well, it's a separate service. So we don't actually run your payroll. We just do the report, the public works or the union reporting for you. So you would either run your own payroll, you would have a payroll company, you know, so somewhere where you're getting your payroll, your taxes and all that paid, we take that information and we put it into what the project requirements are.
Question.
Sure.
Who the heck's gonna tell me on the project
I know.
how to include those rates and stuff?
I
Put
know.
them all together
I know.
into my bid, because what I'm sitting here saying, yeah, I gotta do this, this, and this. I got 4 different categories of jobs: labor, journeyman, et cetera, electrician, et cetera. How do I compress all of that?
It's so
and then
much.
submit it in my bid, because I got to know. For instance, it's a county. I'm looking at the county rate. I'm looking at the city. It's a city job.
Right.
I'm looking at the cities in the county, and then I'm union shop. So how do I calculate all of that to be able to?
Exactly.
I don't care. Whoever has to make up my
Let's
head.
say this part with the labor, right? They're gonna send you, okay?
Okay.
They're gonna send you a
That's okay.
process, okay? Of what every labor is, the
Yeah.
scale, right? And then, let's say local hires, right?
Right.
They're gonna send you what local hires, they'll ask you, okay, you call the call, say, I need an apprentice. They're gonna say, where's the job at? They're gonna give you a zip code, because they gotta go off a zip code, which the city does too. They'll find whatever labor's on the out of work list that belongs to that zip code, and that's how you get it. So once you become union, I'm sure not just all the other unions, they're gonna give you all the information you need. What the scale is right now, what the scale is gonna be next year, so that when you're bidding, you're gonna say, well, my job is gonna take me a whole year. Next year, I gotta pay them this much, so you don't underbid your job. So once you get union, they're gonna provide all that. See, that's what's good about unions. They're gonna provide all that information. You call them and you tell them, look, man, I need help this. They'll send, like, I'm gonna have our president, Javier Nunez, he's gonna call you. They'll have a meeting, he'll buy you lunch, right? And he'll introduce this. They'll hook you up with all kinds of information that's gonna be helpful to you.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not just trying to get you union.
No, no, no.
That's
Like
why
I said, I
bring
was
up
in
questions.
IBEW, so but of course, I just paid, my.
I'm gonna hook you up with
Yeah.
them. And the good thing about him, again, I don't know if you're religious or not, he's a pastor. He's been my pastor for a lot of years.
Oh,
you
yeah.
know? And he's a man of faith. He's gonna speak to you with the truth, and he's not gonna mislead you. He's not gonna
Yeah.
try to unionize you, but he's gonna try to say, look, these are the benefits towards not doing it.
Yeah, I'm a minister myself.
Oh, okay. So
And
yeah, he's
we'll
from
get
Victory.
along
He's from
well.
Victory Outreach. He's a pastor at Victory Outreach.
Oh, man, wow.
Just to add to
Which-
that,
which
they
one?
also- They also sent
Arlena?
somebody,
That's my brother-in-law,
Who?
Eddie.
Eddie. Well, do you know Pastor Javier Nunez?
I don't. I just know my
He's the president
brother-in-law.
from- Yeah, Eddie. Yeah. Wow.
Recruzado?
Church no more.
Yeah.
I used to go when Pastor David was there. Then
Oh,
Pastor
yeah.
David- then Sister
That was their
Faith
pre-
took over, but nobody
Yeah.
liked her. She was a female. Then Pastor Eddie took over.
Yeah, that's my
I know,
brother.
okay.
Teresa's my sister.
Yeah, Victory Outreach is right
You got a new customer now. You got a new customer now.
Amen. That's it. We're down to, we're switching now, you guys, to the right side. At the end, let's do this so we can get through the material. I have links, that's a handout tomorrow, and it can be emailed to you. That way you can actually just click on the link. Let's do this because we're having a little bit of technical difficulties. Tomorrow, we're going to go through the links. That instead, because it's going to take time right now, and I want to make sure we get through the rest of the material. So tomorrow, I'll show you the Public Works Manual, some of the links that are on here. We did do the prevailing wage rate, which is the most important one. So just remember, with prevailing wage rate and, travel also can be applicable on certain trades. So if your workers are in LA County and you're doing a job in Modesto, you need to look at the travel within the trades drop downs because there could be travel.
Travel pay begins on the day it was started, right? The point of origin.
Point of origin, yes. It can also fall into things like when you're talking about lodging and you're talking about, what is it, like, I'm trying to remember if subsistence, $30 a day for subsistence. Lodging, be careful because a lot of them say you cannot have them share rooms. So if you send your workers to go work in Central California, and then there could be something specified in the prevailing wage determination that says that if they're being, put up in a hotel room, that they have to be separate. So if you don't do that, they'll crunch that cost, and then you'll only get half of the credit, and then you fall below. So there's different ways that can make you fall below. So be careful with travel. Be careful. We're going to look at some things in the manual. Remember, major is your double and single asterisk. In a crazy economy, you might see rates go backwards. During the recession and during COVID, we saw some at a standstill. Those are important notices. We'll go through that as well. So even though they put out these wage schedules, they could put something out in error or something could change. So it doesn't happen very often, but there is a place called important notices, and that's where they're like, oops, like carpenter, we said it was $1.05 increase, but it's really $1.10. That's a pretty bad example because
per diem rates fall into place.
per diem rates are on the determination in one of the drop downs. So, and they come from the collective bargaining agreements. So if you're a union and you're following your agreement, double check it against the state's website, but you're probably in alignment. The union is a lot of where the source is for the travel. So we've got, remember, the base rate plus the fringe benefits equal the total hourly rate. What if I am a non-union contractor and I provide Kaiser Health Insurance? So what I could do is take a credit against the health portion of the prevailing wage rate. But you have to be careful. I have never seen in 20 plus years, and in my company we have over 60 years, 70 years combined compliance experience, because I've got some people who have been in the field for a long time. We have never seen a private plan, when you do the calculation, equal the same credit as the union plans. So you have to be careful, because let's say on a union side in the determination, let's say the health and welfare is $15 an hour. If you are not union and you're paying to a private medical plan like Blue Cross, Health Net, you take the total hours worked per year, let's say it's 2,080 if they work on average 40 hours a week, and you divide that into your annual costs, and that's your hourly rate. And we don't see them go as high as the union rates, because their benefits, however that's working out, are good, and they're getting a pretty good credit there. So let's say the prevailing wage determination has a $12 an hour health and welfare, and we pay Blue Cross. We do the calculation, which is laid out in the manual, so I'll show you that. We do the calculation, maybe we get $2 an hour credit. Now we can pay them $10 in the health and welfare portion and take our $2 an hour credit. But you have to be careful with that. Also, you have to know what you're doing, because if, let's say on a group of 5 people, some of those people include their families as coverage. The state is going to back those charges out, because they're only looking at the benefits that are applied directly to the worker. So let's say you're paying $2,000 a year for a Kaiser, but for one of your employees, only $1,000 of that applies to them. The other $1,000 applies to their family. We're only going to get the $1,000 credit. So we just have to be careful when we're taking credit. I can't say don't do it, but I am very cautious when contractors ask me if they have vacation days, if they can calculate that in and take a credit against the vacation category in the determination. Because again, there's rules behind these fringe benefits. The rules are irrevocable. Let me go to the next slide. You can, it managed by a third party. The fringe benefits are, this is when I was saying, like union plan versus private plan, you have to annualize, you have to take the 2,080 hours, annualize. There's guidelines for taking fringe benefit credit. It has to benefit the employee, so these, a vacation day would benefit. Non-forfeitable, I would say it has to be in your company manual, written somewhere, like legitimate. Irrevocable, you cannot take it back. So what's happened and why the state frowns upon it is because they've seen a lot of contractors take credit for vacation, and they take it in the, in those categories, those fringe benefit categories, and then the employee leaves and they never cash them out. Paid on a regular basis, definite and certain. Also a third party. So here's why the benefits work great with the union. When you are paying, you're doing your monthly union reporting, and you're paying health and welfare, pension, all that to the union, it's not actually the union. It's a different company. They're very tied in with the union because their union is a big client for them. It's the union trust. It's a third party trust. The local office does not have that money in their account. It's being completely managed by a different entity. So that makes it, very safe as far as, is the worker really getting the benefit? It's managed by a third party. You can't take it back. So it complies with all of these laws that protect those benefits for the workers. So another thing you want to be careful with is contribution versus deduction. So contributions are like those fringe benefits, your pension, your medical. Deduction is a straight take it out of the employee's wages, like taxes. So if you're paying the prevailing wage rate and we're taking let's say it's $1 that goes into training fund, $1 on the prevailing wage determination is a contribution. The auditors will accept it, but they really don't like to see it deducted from the paycheck. You got to be very careful when you are deducting money from workers. If you give your employee an advance on payroll, have them sign, him or her, what's called we call it APD. It's authorized payroll deduction. that person needs to authorize you to be able to take from their check, because the labor law is very particular with taking wages away from workers. So they need to authorize us. If we give them a $500 advance and we're going to take $100 out of each check, they prefer to have that done on the side, but a lot of companies don't. At the very least, you need to have that laid out. And I have a form. It's a generic form that I can send out. So we need to lay out, what was the original amount? When did this start? How much is going to be taken out? And we need the employee signature. So there's certain agencies like LAUSD, the City of LA. If you go into audit with them and you do not show those authorizations, they will not give you that credit, and you're going to be below the prevailing wage rate for those checks. So be careful when you're taking, when it's a contribution versus a deduction. There's different laws for union and non-union. So once in a while, let's say there's a $2 increase. Right? Maybe medical costs have gone up tremendously. The union might take more of that $2. They could put the whole thing into medical. They could pay below the base rate, only if it's part of a collective bargaining agreement and it's specified. So for a non-union contractor, when we looked at base plus fringes equals total, non-union contractors cannot pay below the base rate. Union contractors, now there's a law in place. It's not going to be anything massive, but they can go below the base. Nobody can go below the total. So if it's 30 plus 20 equals 50, everybody's got to at least pay the 50. But how we get to that 50 can depend. How we're compliant with that can vary from union to non-union. Private plans to union plans, it gets a little, and here's the thing too, is that our payroll reports need to reflect that. They need to reflect how our pay is, how we're paying. So we didn't look at this slide, but we've been talking about it. Just to reiterate again, this was just that all of the dollar amounts in this presentation, they're just hypothetical. But there's, different ways to be compliant with the prevailing wage rate. One is the union plans. So on a $50 an hour total hourly rate, the check rate, if it's the base rate is 30, all fringe benefits are paid to the trust. There's where you get your $20. If you add all these up, boom, you reached your $50 minimum pay. If all the fringe benefits are going to the worker, all of them, you're just like, I'm just paying the prevailing wage rate. The check rate is going to be $49 an hour because this, everything but that dollar training gets put off to the side and sent to the state or to an apprenticeship program. And so now we've reached the $50 an hour by paying everything except for the training to the worker, and the dollar goes to the training funds. Now let's give an example of private plans. Non-union worker with the private plan. By the way, there's pension plans out there that are great. Contractors plan, hands down, I see them survive audits, and you get a dollar for dollar credit on pension. So contractors plan, that's a good one out there. So let's say, okay, now we're non-union, but we do provide some benefits to our workers. So we provide $10 an hour into a pension plan. So the total hourly rate, remember, we're looking at 50. So they're getting $39 in their check, $10 an hour credit because that's going to a pension plan, and $1 is going to the training funds at the state or at an apprenticeship program. There's our $50 an hour. So this is the amount we're going to comply with. How we do that depends on our company, and how we're able to depends on if we're union or non-union.
The second one.
For a non-union, paying all of the fringe benefits to the worker.
Okay.
And this is a non-union that offers some type of medical or pension.
Yeah, pension.
Yeah, so you can take a credit, but you have to be careful how you take that credit. And then this is union.
Union.
And everything that you pay to the union, they're going to give you a credit for. There was one thing that I wanted to show you. Oh, we're gonna, I do want to show you one thing real quick because this is not a certified payroll class, but I do want to just take a minute to tell you about payroll. We'll just backtrack here. Okay, so prevailing wage calculation pitfalls, just to reiterate. Remember to look at predetermined increases. Remember, if you're union, 99% you're compliant, but double check the comparison, double check the rates. Remember to, it's very mathy, so remember to do your calculations, hidden fringe benefits. Non-apprenticeship trades, if there's a non-apprenticeship trade, which I can't even think of one right now, at once upon a time the roofers didn't have an apprenticeship, the training funds can go to the worker, but that rarely happens. Most of them are. Apprentices, they also increase apprentice periods. We're going to get more into that tomorrow. Mixed funding, state and federal, we'll go over that tomorrow. And OT calculations, we did talk about that. Mixed funds, looking at the Saturday rate, all of that stuff. Basically, just dissect your wage sheet. Dissect your prevailing wage determination. You know, let me, the DIR, as part of the links that we'll go over tomorrow, there is an email address. The DIR does have consultants. Things kind of dropped a little during COVID. They're coming back up. They're coming back. The services are coming back, but it's not full force like it was prior to COVID. This 415-703-4774, that's like a hotline. We would call that all day long and try to get through the busy line, right? And they will give us rates, the rate allocations. Now it's a little bit harder, but they do have consultants there, and the apprenticeship consultants, in my experience, they're more available. They answer. They're usually somebody from the union who had many years in the union with the apprenticeship programs, and now they're consultants for the state. So you can use your resources. You can do your homework if you're not really sure. You have to be careful with on-site work also, because off-site is pretty much where prevailing wage is. It's off-site, it's on the job site. What you're doing on the job is what you need to pay close attention. But if you have created a facility that is purely financed by your prevailing wage project, obviously this would be a really big project, and the work, all the work coming out of there is under that project, it could make off-site prevailing wage covered. It could. It's rare. It's very specific. The coverage is very specific to certain scenarios, but it could be, it's close, let's say it's close to the construction site. It's a rental that you did for that job only, all your materials there. The workers who are transporting the material only transport to that project. They may consider that covered. But quickly, when we get into the reporting and what's required, because that's what you're going to want to know. Remember, is you're going to want to know what do I have to do on this project? What is, what are the requirements? And there is a lot of, let me see. There's a lot of different forms and reporting portals that where the reporting is done. So, hold on one second. Here we go. Somebody mentioned LCP Tracker. That's an awesome third-party software that has come a long way in this industry. A lot of agencies and contractors choose to pay the subscription and use LCP Tracker as the reporting portal. So not only do we want to know, what's the DIR project number, so we can see the bid advertisement date, the physical location, all of that. Where's the compliance packet? You know, in that compliance packet, if there's one or there isn't, where do we submit the reports? Because not everything is manually, most of it's digital. If it's a federal project, you may have to sign with blue ink and send it in. So there's still some old school methods out there that were, you know, I'm going to the post office every week and mailing them out. Most of them are digital or online, and it could be portal specific or agency specific, like City of LA uses OCPS, County of LA uses eComply, LAUSD has their own system, Metro uses LCP Tracker. You know, so it's all the same concept, but that's why I say if you have somebody do your prevailing wage compliance, if they don't already have the skills, man, those computer skills really come in handy, because you're going to have to maneuver through these different reporting portals if you're doing projects with different agencies.
If you start working with me, you guys will take care of that.
We take care of that, yeah. We hit all the, we hit a lot of.
I'm on the internet now.
Yeah, I don't blame you, because you know what, you're there to deliver. You know, I have so much respect for the trades. I have a lot of respect for the trades. You guys are out there building our infrastructure. So, I mean, that's why I'm in, you know, like we lose sleep over this. If I could rewind 20 something years and see what it was like today, I probably wouldn't be here, you know, but I'm not a good artist, and I just fell into this. And here I am, and it's very purposeful to me because there's so much compliance that has to get done properly and not a lot of help out there. So we're really trying to see our contractors survive all of the regulations, you know, which they're good. I mean, there's purpose behind these regulations, but it's just hard to know them all. So this is the state's prevailing wage form. It's called the DIR A1-131. The federal has a different form. And this is like a manual PDF, you know. So let's say that you are on a job and again, you don't know where to submit them. I would default to this form and do the payrolls and keep them on file. The eCPR that is done online is not considered certified payroll. It is not what is sufficient for auditing. I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that it's there mainly for, we can see some payroll information, but also it's for the public records request, because as public, being members of the public, we are entitled to certain information. So if we can go, any of us can go online and search a payroll, an eCPR that's submitted through the DIR system, not all the information will be there. Names, socials will be blacked out because that's personal employee information, but we can see trades and rates. So that is one way that the competitors are looking at each other and saying, what are they reporting on payroll? They can go to the state's website and see if they've reported eCPR. But this is this form can be used in audit. So if you ever get what's called a 10-day request for certified payroll and you have these done, you would send these. But here's the example of the different pay and what that looks like on paper, because what we don't want to do is we don't want to trigger audits, right? We want things to make sense to whoever's approving our compliance. And remember those three pay structures: union, non-union paying total to the worker, non-union paying to a private plan and to the worker, and some of the fringes to the worker. Our reporting needs to support that. Think of it as a money trace. What if we're saying that if we are non-union and we're paying the $68 rate that we saw earlier all to the worker, and somebody asked to prove that out through the check stubs, the bank statements, they should see $68 an hour on the check stub. What a lot of contractors do is they misinterpret the layout of the determination, and they report the $41 base, all the fringes separately, and then it would add up to the total, but the support doesn't match it. What we report, how we pay, has to be in alignment with what we report and what proof we can provide at the end of the day, because a good compliance program will ask for proof of payment. When I'm monitoring compliance, I want to see bank statements, redacted out what doesn't apply, or a cash check, because a lot of pay now is direct deposit. That's in the scenario where you might have a payroll report with the bank transaction. You black out whatever doesn't apply and just leave what's open for the auditors to be able to verify that it was paid. So in our scenario, sample 1, we pay everything to the worker except for the training. So it is the, how much are we paying here? I don't know what numbers I used, but the total hourly rate, oh yikes. This is our last thing we're going to look at. The total hourly rate is the 5304 plus 2760 divided by 40. So that plus that is the total hourly rate. So that's what it looks like on payroll. Now here, we're paying partially to a plan and to the employee except the training, because we're deducting the training. So here we've got a lesser. We're paying the $10 an hour. Example. We're paying the $10 an hour to the pension. Where is our pension? Pension. So we've got 4304 because we're paying the total hourly rate, but we're taking a $10 credit because we're putting that to pension. And then we've got our taxes, and we're showing that we've contributing $400 an hour. $400 for that pay period to the pension plan. That's how we come up with our prevailing. And then here on this last one, this is how we're paying according to what's on the determination, which we know 99.9% chance is what's on the union's wage scale. And that is, the base rate is $33.19. And the way we come up with the total hourly rate is we've made all these contributions in these fringe benefit areas. So this is how the 3 scenarios look on the reporting. So it's a lot of people, a lot of contractors who are non-union will report this way, but they're actually paying this way. They're actually cashing out the fringe benefits. So just remember to just have it make sense on paper. Less audits, easier, quicker payment releases. And again, we know what the requirements are, but where are we going to send these requirements? So that's important. Any questions? We went 9 minutes over. Or wait, is it 12? Oh no. Oh good. We have more. No. We have more time. No. You guys aren't going anywhere. No, I was thinking 11. It's going to be noon. Okay, good. So we have more time for this. Okay, so here's another thing that, well, before I go to that, let me go to the, so this is the federal form. So it's a little less information than on the state one, because on the state form, remember we had all the fringe benefits here. The federal form does not have that. So the state of,
Would that be like federal for like military bases?
military would probably fall strictly federal. But so if it's a strictly federal project, this is why the funding is important. By the way, federal projects, the rate, the wage determinations are in the contract. State, they only have to reference. We just have to find the bid advertisement date. So a state, that's why a lot of the compliance packets are so thick if there's federal funding, because a whole lot of it is going to be the wages, the actual wage determination, the federal from the DOL website. So we've been on the DIR website today, Department of Industrial Relations. That's California's labor law website. But on the federal side, it's the Department of Labor, the DOL. And here's the thing you have to be careful of on mixed funds or purely federal. If we take the printouts, let's say we print all the wages for California, and we print all the wages for the federal side, and we line them up, we stack them, California is going to be a lot higher. There's more classifications on the California site than there is on the Department of Labor. And you got to be careful how you use your trades, because on the California side, laborers can do landscape irrigation and plumbers. On the federal side, only plumbers can do that.
Can you repeat that, please?
So we're talking federal and state,
Right,
landscape irrigation work.
right.
On the state side, landscape irrigation falls under plumbers and laborers.
Right.
On the federal side, it only falls under plumbers.
Yeah, but federal contracts don't require licensing, so how does that work?
What type of licensing?
I can do a project for the Army Corps of Engineers, and they won't ask for a license or anything.
So that depends on if your project is purely federal, then you're fine. But if it's mixed funding, if it has California funding in it, then you'll have to show your license. So it just depends. So if you're on the federal side, that's fine.
Yeah, but you just said federal would require a plumber to do irrigation systems, right?
They'll allow, yeah. They won't recognize the classification, labor, landscape irrigation. They're not going to recognize it. They're going to put it under plumber.
Yeah, but why does the Fed care if they don't even ask for your license to do work?
Because it's the prevailing wage rates
About labor?
Yeah, it's about labor. The prevailing wage rates originated from the Davis-Bacon Act back in probably 1800s. Davis-Bacon is federal. And so they have rate structures. Licensing is a whole nother thing. So licensing is a different concept. Like the feds don't require apprenticeship. They have apprenticeship programs when we're on a mixed funded project or we're on a federal project and a contractor is using apprentices. We get certifications from the DO, and it's for the DOL, the Department of Labor. So if it's both federal and state, and I want to show the compliance for an apprentice on payroll, I'm going to get a DIR cert, and I'm going to get a DOL cert because we're on a mixed funded project. But if it's purely federal, they're not looking for apprentices, but the state of California is. So the state of California requires you to at least try to employ apprentices. Yeah.
Same thing
They'll
you
have
just
the
said.
say-so then.
Yeah.
Will they have the final say-so, saying our job is in California, you're funding it, but we have the say-so?
Yeah, it depends because it's a good point that you bring up because even if a project is purely federal funded, if it's being administered through a California agency, California law can apply.
So that means.
It's a
like
good question.
A lot of funding is coming down for homeless, et cetera. But that's federal funding coming to the city. So what you just explained applies to both.
Exactly. Oh, let me tell you, those projects are heavy compliance. They're my hardest ones.
Yeah.
They're my hardest compliance. And because what we see a lot of also, which I think is a good thing, but it's more paperwork. I mean, if we want to attract the generation that we're claiming doesn't want to do work, physical work, and we want to attract them to construction, there's a whole lot of paperwork they could do if they don't want to carry a hammer. Because
They better get some physical work because the machines are coming.
that's true, yeah.
Machines are coming.
Yeah, and
I don't want to do some physical work.
right? Yeah, no, there's a whole lot. I was going to say something based on your question, though. What was your question again? I just went
Oh, no,
blank.
I was talking about if the city and federal money, it goes along that same example you just gave.
Right,
Maybe
right.
we talk
But
about
my initial
Homeless,
question-
thank you, yeah.
My initial question was about union scale and prevailing.
And prevailing.
That was my union.
Yeah.
That was my initial way
Eh,
of being.
If I can find a sample tonight, I'm going to bring it tomorrow.
Okay.
And I'm going to show you the difference. But, okay, thank you for that, because I went blank, the homelessness funding. So what we're seeing a lot of, and I think it's a good thing, but again, it's more paperwork, is, and I think this is also preparing us for what we're going to see in tomorrow's slide regarding apprenticeship and skilled workers, is there's a lot of job agencies working in conjunction with compliance on the public works projects. So they are trying, the cities especially, and on these projects that are heavily funded by the feds and they're for the homelessness, they're for the cities, they along with local hire, they are trying to get what they call targeted workers. There's different terms, targeted or disadvantaged workers onto the job sites and veterans. So there's organizations, actually Helmets to Hard Hat is a nationwide organization. It actually, I didn't know until recently when I really started talking to them more. It's actually under the union umbrella. It's just not a local, it's not a union, but it's actually union related. So they offer more services to the signatory contractors.
They also want to hire a lot of ex-convicts.
Yes, that's targeted workers. So it's veterans. Helmets to Hard Hat is one of the big programs out there that helps the veterans get into the construction industry. And the targeted or disadvantaged workers could be involved in the criminal system, single parent, welfare, foster care system. So what they want is, and there's requirements, the local hire requirements could be as strong as 5 miles within the radius. Jordan Downs area. Give me 10% of your hours as targeted worker. Work with the job agency in order to meet that goal. And you still have to comply with your apprenticeship. So it's a lot of ins and outs. There's one, it's called, M3C or MC3, I always got it backwards. It's like a short construction pre-apprentice program that is there to help workers get some base construction knowledge and help them get into the union apprenticeship programs.
LA Hire, heard of them?
It's another one, LA Hire, We Build, Power to Workers. So what we're seeing as a trend in compliance is, not only do it's bigger, and this is why I go back to read your contract, because we have labor compliance, which says prevailing wage rates, do the reporting, you pay your workers and do your reporting. But do we have apprenticeship on that? Do we have PLA on that? Do we have local hire on that? Do we have targeted workers on that? Do we have skilled and trained workforce? So it's growing. It's branching out, and depending on your bid, your contract will determine which of all of that is in there. So you could have a contract with a city that has just a straight prevailing wage compliance, nothing else to it, with a small city. But then you could be with the city of LA that has so much funding in it, and every could be have HUD. That's part of disadvantaged targeted workers as well, is the income level. And maybe apprentices will help you qualify for employing workers with the lower income level. So there's a lot of different things, and it's not to scare you, but it's to say to do your homework, read your contract. That's what it is. And ask the questions, ask for the compliance packets. The mixed funding, since we're getting into a lot of federal versus state, there's a lot of forms that, here we go, statement of compliance. Okay, here's the thing about the federal and the state, and when I was saying you have to comply with the stricter of the two. So we saw with all of the busy reporting that I put as an example of the state default certified payroll form, right? And then we saw a quick look at the federal, which doesn't have the fringe benefits. So if we were on a mixed project, you always want to go with the stricter of the two. This is the difference of the statement of compliance, which is also part of your payroll report, and you certify under penalty of perjury. So this is where also the difference between an ADP payroll report versus a labor compliance certified payroll. We're certifying under penalty of perjury that the records are accurate as to our knowledge. So I've never seen anybody be prosecuted for it, but they do have the verbiage there. I think that where the real heavy crime comes in is called kickbacks. And that goes back to a federal law called the Copeland Act. And that's where you don't give a worker money and then take it back. And there are scenarios where it's, it's hard work on the investigators, but they have been able to go and see people go to the bank with the workers, and then after they cash the check, they take the money back. And so it's hard to catch it on paper, but in practice, it's really bad. It's underpayment, and it can result in some type of prosecution because we are certifying under penalty of perjury, and it's a very deliberate underpayment. There's inadvertent and intentional. So we can inadvertently make a prevailing wage error. We can forget to do an increase, or we can misclassify our scope. But if it's very deliberate, then the penalties are harsher. The repercussion coming from the auditors are harsher. So the statement of compliance is page 2 or whatever, however many pages. It's the last page in your certified payroll report. And this is the states versus the federal. So you could see that the federal, ironically, their form is simpler, but their statement of compliance is wordy. And then on the state side, their form is more complicated, but their statement of compliance is simple. So you may have a scenario where you got to use the state form for the reporting and the federal form for the statement of compliance. If it's a mixed fund, they want the stricter of everything, the stricter of the two. So the reporting can be, a pain, because maybe you've submitted all your payroll reports with the left one, but it's a mixed funding. So now you got to go back and, you got to go in blue ink and mail them in with the federal form on the right. It's a lot of just kind of ins and outs. I don't know if we can see this a little bit better on even though we're to the left, or to the right for you guys. This is that PwC 100. Okay, so what we pull up on the state's website when we get the project ID number, usually it's a 6-digit code. Remember, you're asking for this at the beginning of the project. And this is what I mean about it has good information to help us with our compliance, because it has the awarding body, so you'll know who awarded. It has the name of the project. That's important for your reporting. We want to put the project name. The contract amount gives us an idea of the size of the project. Are we talking something, with a few hundred workers, or are we talking a project with 5 workers? That makes a difference. But here's what's key. Prevailing wage rate, it has the bid advertisement date. The first bid advertisement date. So this is an old sample, right? Because 2/6/2017. So this would be 2016-2 determination. Because remember, February 22nd and August 22nd is when the determinations are issued. 10 days after that is their effective date. This, even though we're in 2017, we haven't reached February 22nd plus 10 days, whatever that is, depending if it's a leap year. So this would be 2016-2. And then it has the physical address and location, which is, we'll see tomorrow when we look at the DAS forms, why that's important. So I just, I love having these things because it gives me comfort in my office that we've got information from the agency and we can calculate those rates and know for sure which rate sheet we're using. What is the prevailing wage requirement on the project? So that's why we're always pushing for having the PwC 100. So part of the labor compliance is going to be, it gets frustrating because it's a lot of different forms, right? So that compliance packet I was telling you about, 30 pages versus 300, depending on the funding, depending on the agency, depending maybe even on the size of the project. So one of the forms that's pretty common and they could hold payment for, it's called the fringe benefit statement. Why is it important? Because remember, the fringe benefits are a component of the prevailing wage rate, and they're very important. We cannot skip out on fringe benefits. The auditors need to know what's happening with your fringe benefits. How are those being handled? So again, this is to reiterate the same example we've been going over. Total hourly rate paid to the employee. Everything, fringes cashed out to the employee minus the training. Here's how it would look. Some primes or somebody might want specific wording here. Most of them will accept this. You know, you can break it down, look at the schedule, what the amounts are. Vacation, paid to employee. Health and welfare, paid to employee. Pension, paid to employee. Training, paid to the state, CAC. And other, paid to employee. And this is the total amount. So those fringe benefits, we are telling the labor compliance what's happening with the fringes. They're going to match that up against our payroll. And that's how we know when something is not right. And it could be just an error, just a misunderstanding on how to do all this, but it creates more work and it creates payment delays. So here's one where, remember, we paid $10 into pension. So vacation, 0, 0, should have put nothing there, but $10 in pension is going to contractor's plan. 69 cents is still going to the state. And then the balance of the fringe benefits is going to the employee. The fringe benefit area, the amounts can vary. So if you're non-union and fringe benefits has $10 in health and welfare and $12 in pension, you could pay all $22 to pension. So you can play with the numbers within the fringe benefit area. Okay, and then the last one is what a signatory contractor, what a union contractor's fringe benefit statement would look like under this scenario. The scenario is we're paying to the labor's trust fund, okay? And each amount on that determination, we're letting the auditors know where that money is. So all of these equal the same $20.54, but they're just structured differently. These are the type of forms that may be required a lot of, up front if you're just starting a new project and it's like, hey, fill out this compliance packet before you go on site. You're going to see things like this, like a fringe benefit statement, a labor law checklist, who's authorized to sign your payroll. It could be a whole slew of different documentation. And especially if we get into the housing and all of that, that has to be submitted before you get the approval to go on site. Or if you're a prime, if you're a general or a contractor subcontracting, then you want to collect these from the subs. So remember, it was in the slide, but I don't remember if I mentioned it, the contracts are a flow down. So whatever is required by the top tier, by the prime, from a compliance perspective, everybody else has to comply with it. So we don't get out of filing certain forms because our contract only has $5,000 worth of work. It goes up to the value of the prime contract. So everything that's required up here is just flows right down to everybody. So the upfront, you can have a contractor who's on the project for a year and a half versus somebody who's there for only a week. Their payroll records may look shorter, but their paperwork up front and closeout could be the same, because no matter what, we want certain paperwork on file and we want the reporting done no matter how big or small your scope of work is.
What's funny, Veronica, like this big project, metro project is going to start from San Fernando, Van Nuys, North Hollywood, Pasadena, that new metro that they're going to run through the intersection, right? Right there and then, those contractors, the prime, one of them scans come Flatiron. In the Zoom meetings, they'll tell you if you're not union, don't even waste your time on this project because we're not going to accept your bids. So pretty much they're telling you, it's all union jobs. And I think, like I say, I think they feel more comfortable because they're knowing that their employees are, everything's going to be paid accordingly.
Okay, so any questions? Yep, and we're good. We're 12:00. I got my timing right now.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, everybody. See you tomorrow.